I hadn't meant to listen in on their conversation. It was one of those accidents of fate, the kind you wish you could undo, but know you'll never forget. The cabin was quiet, the kind of deep, unnerving quiet that only the woods can offer at night. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. It sounds soft and eerie, but inside, there was a more unsettling noise, the murmur of voices coming from Roman's study. I was halfway down the stairs when I first heard it. I had come down for a book, one I'd left on the coffee table earlier. The day had been long, filled with forced smiles and strained conversations, and I had hoped to lose myself in the pages of a novel before bed. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, a low, almost conspiratorial tone caught my attention. I froze, my hand hovering over the banister. The door to Roman's study was slightly ajar, just enough for me to hear his voice, though the words were still indistinct. Roman, my mother's new husband, had always seemed too smooth, too polished. He had a way of making everything sound reasonable, even when it wasn't. But tonight, there was something different in his voice, a coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me. I took a step closer, moving as quietly as I could, until I was standing just outside the door. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound almost deafening in the silence of the cabin. I knew I shouldn't be listening, but something inside me, a deep, knowing instinct, told me I had to hear what he was saying. "Has to look like an accident," Roman was saying, his voice low and measured. "The mountains are perfect, remote, dangerous. No one will question it." My breath caught at my throat. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy and full of menace. I leaned closer, my hand pressing against the wall for support as I struggled to make sense of what I was hearing. "I'll make sure she's alone," Roman continued, his tone as smooth as ever, but with a chilling edge. "Once she's gone, her mother will be easy to deal with. The money will be ours." I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. He was talking about me. Roman was planning to kill me. Just then, I heard the voice on the other end of the line, deep and gravelly, belonging to someone I didn't recognize. "You sure you can pull this off? The old man left quite a fortune, but if you screw this up—" "I won't screw this up," Roman interrupted, his voice hardening. "This is the best way. No loose ends. We'll be rid of her, and then we'll get the rest." The rest, my mother. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Roman wasn't just after me, he was after my mother too. The money my father had left us after his death had attracted the worst kind of predator, and Roman, with his easy smile and charming demeanor, had wormed his way into our lives with a deadly purpose. I felt sick, a cold wave of nausea washing over me as I backed away from the door. I needed to get out of here to warn my mother, but I was paralyzed with fear. How could I tell her? She was so in love with him, so convinced that he was the answer to all our prayers after my father's death. How could I destroy that illusion without destroying her? Lost in my thoughts, I wasn't careful enough. My foot caught on the edge of the rug, and I stumbled, bumping into the small table by the wall. A porcelain vase wobbled precariously before falling to the floor with a loud crash. I froze, my heart skipping a beat as the voices inside the study abruptly stopped. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, but it was too late. The door to Roman's study swung open, and there he stood, his face shrouded in shadow, but his eyes glinting with something dark and dangerous. "Marka?" His voice was deceptively soft, almost concerned, but I could hear the undercurrent of suspicion. "What are you doing up so late?" I forced myself to look at him, to meet those cold eyes that now seemed to see right through me. I couldn't sleep," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I was just coming to get a book." Roman's gaze flickered to the broken vase, then back to me. He took a slow step forward, and I instinctively took a step back, my body reacting to the danger that my mind was still trying to process. "Strange," he murmured, his tone almost mocking. "I didn't hear you coming down the stairs. You must have been very quiet." I swallowed hard, trying to think of something, anything, to say that wouldn't betray the terror coursing through me. I didn't want to wake anyone. I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. For a long moment, Roman just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, you should get some rest, Margot. We have a big day ahead of us tomorrow. I nodded, too afraid to do anything else. Right, I'll just head back to bed then. I turned and fled up the stairs, not caring if I made noise this time. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip the banister. When I finally reached my room, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. My mind raced. What was I going to do? I had to protect my mother, but how could I convince her that the man she loved was a monster? And if Roman suspected that I knew, he might act sooner rather than later. I was running out of time. As I stood there in the dark, my mind whirling with fear and confusion, one thing became painfully clear. I was trapped in a house with a man who wanted me dead. And if I didn't find a way to stop him, I wouldn't live to see the sunrise. The next morning, I woke up with a knot of dread in my stomach. The events of the previous night felt like a twisted dream, but the fear clinging to me was all too real. I had overheard Roman plotting to kill me, and now I was stuck in the same house with him, forced to pretend everything was normal. The weight of what I knew pressed down on me like a physical burden, and I struggled to keep my panic in check. I went through the motions of getting ready, my mind racing as I tried to think of a plan. I needed to tell my mother what I had heard, but how? How could I make her see that the man she had married was planning something so monstrous? And even if she believed me, how could we get away before Roman made his move? As I made my way downstairs, I was acutely aware of every sound: the creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the soft murmur of voices coming from the kitchen. I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. What if Roman was already trying to manipulate my mother against me? What if he had convinced her that I was unstable, that my grief over my father's death had driven me to paranoia? I took a deep breath and forced myself to walk into the kitchen, where I found my mother and Roman sitting at the table. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the scene that belied the coldness I felt inside. My mother looked up as I entered, her face brightening with a smile. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice cheerful. "Did you sleep well?" I swallowed hard, trying to match her tone. "Yeah, I guess," I lied, avoiding Roman's gaze. "Good, good," Roman interjected smoothly. He was leaning back in his chair, looking every bit the picture of calm confidence. "I was just telling your mother that we should do something fun today. How about a trip to the mountains?" The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. It was too soon. He was already trying to set his plan in motion. I forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as strained as it felt. "The mountains? I don't know. I was thinking of just staying in today." "Nonsense," Roman said, his tone light but insistent. "The fresh air will do us all some good, and I know your mother's been wanting to go hiking since we moved here. What do you say, darling?" He turned to my mother, his expression so convincing that for a moment I almost doubted what I had heard last night. But then I saw the way his eyes flicked to me, just for a second, and I knew this was no innocent suggestion. He was trying to lure me into a trap. My mother hesitated, looking between us. "It does sound nice," she said, though there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. "But if Margot's not up for it, we can always go another time." Roman's smile didn't falter. "Of course, but I really think it would be good for her. It might help clear her head, help her move forward. Don't you agree, Margot?" He was pushing me, testing me. I could see it in his eyes, the way he was trying to gauge my reaction. He wanted to see if I would take the bait, if I would walk willingly into his deadly plan. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. If I refused outright, he might become suspicious, might escalate his plans. But if I agreed, I could buy myself some time, maybe figure out a way to turn the situation to my advantage. "Okay," I said slowly, forcing a casual tone. "A hike sounds nice. Maybe it'll help clear my head, like you said." Roman's smile widened, though there was something in it that made my skin crawl. "Great, I'll pack us some lunch. We can head out in an hour." As he stood up and left the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. I had just agreed to go on a hike with a man who was planning to kill me. But I couldn't back out now. I had to play along, at least until I could figure out a way to escape. My mother reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with concern. Are you sure you're okay, Margot? You've seemed distant lately. I looked at her, my heart aching. I wanted so badly to tell her the truth, to beg her to run away with me before it was too late. But I knew that Roman would be back any minute, and I couldn't risk him overhearing. I'm fine, Mom, I said, forcing a smile. Really, I think getting out of the house will be good for me. She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but if you ever need to talk about anything, I'm here, okay? I know, I whispered, guilt gnawing at me. I was lying to her, hiding something that could destroy our lives. But I didn't have a choice. An hour later, we were in the car, winding our way up the narrow mountain roads. The air was crisp and cool, the sky a brilliant blue above us. But all I could feel was the weight of dread pressing down on me. Roman was behind the wheel, humming softly to himself, as if this were just another pleasant family outing. My mother sat beside him, gazing out at the scenery, blissfully unaware of the danger we were in. I sat in the back, my mind racing as I tried to think of a way out. I couldn't just jump out of the car, not without raising suspicion. And even if I did manage to escape, we were miles from anywhere, surrounded by dense forest. I had no idea where we were going or what Roman had planned. As we rounded a bend, Roman glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes locking onto mine. You're awfully quiet back there, Margot. Everything all right? I forced myself to meet his gaze, trying to hide the fear that was clawing at me. Just enjoying the view, I replied, my voice steady. Good, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's going to be a beautiful day. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I had to find a way to warn my mother before it was too late, but with Roman so close, I didn't know how. Finally, we reached a secluded trailhead, and Roman parked the car. Here we are, he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. This is one of my favorite spots. Not too many people know about it. My mother smiled as she got out of the car, stretching her legs. It's beautiful. I can't believe we've never been here before. Roman came around to my side, opening the door for me with a flourish. I thought it would be nice to share it with the two of you. A little adventure, just us. I forced a smile as I got out of the car, my heart racing. The forest loomed around us, the trees tall and thick, their branches whispering in the wind. It was so quiet, so isolated, that it felt like we were the only people in the world. As we started down the trail, I lagged behind, trying to think of a way to get my mother alone. Roman was leading the way, his stride confident, while my mother followed, chatting happily about the scenery. Finally, I saw my chance. Roman had stopped to adjust his backpack, and my mother had slowed down to look at a cluster of wildflowers growing by the side of the trail. I quickened my pace until I was beside her, keeping my voice low so Roman wouldn't hear. Mom, I whispered urgently, glancing over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't listening. We need to leave, now. She looked at me in surprise, her brow furrowing. What are you talking about? We just got here. No, you don't understand, I insisted, my voice trembling. Roman, he's not who you think he is. He's dangerous. We need to go back to the car and leave before. Before I could finish, Roman's voice cut through the air like a knife. What's going on back there? I flinched, my heart skipping a beat as I turned to see him watching us, his expression unreadable. My mother glanced between us, confusion and concern etched on her face. Margot was just saying she's not feeling well, she said, her voice hesitant. Maybe we should head back. Roman's eyes narrowed, his smile tightening. Come on, we've only just started. You'll feel better once we get moving. There was an edge to his voice now, a barely concealed impatience that made my blood run cold. I knew that if we didn't get away soon, I might not get another chance. But my mother hesitated, clearly torn. I don't know. Maybe Margot's right. We can always come back another time. Roman's smile froze, and for a split second, I saw a flash of anger in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by the same easy charm he always wore like a mask. Of course, if that's what you want, he said smoothly. But I was hoping we could at least reach the lookout point. It's just a short hike, and the view is worth it. He was trying to lure us deeper into the forest. The trail wound deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around us as we climbed higher and higher into the mountains. My heart pounded with every step, the weight of dread growing heavier with each passing minute. I kept glancing at my mother, desperate to find a way to convince her to turn back, but every time I tried to speak, Roman was there, his presence oppressive and inescapable. The air grew cooler as we ascended, the forest growing darker and more foreboding. The cheerful chirping of birds was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of our footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The path grew narrower, the drop-offs on either side becoming steeper, and I realized with a sinking feeling that we were getting closer to the cliff Roman had mentioned. "Almost there," Roman said, his voice unsettlingly calm as he led the way. "Just around this bend, and we'll reach the lookout point. You're going to love it." I bit my lip, glancing at my mother. She looked tired but determined, her cheeks flushed from the exertion. There was a hint of unease in her eyes, but she hadn't yet grasped the danger we were in. Roman had done an excellent job of masking his true intentions, but I knew I was running out of time. As we rounded the final bend, the trail suddenly opened up into a wide, flat area, and I felt a surge of panic as I saw the cliff's edge looming just ahead. The view was breathtaking, vast expanses of rolling hills and valleys stretching out below us, with the horizon fading into a misty blue. But I couldn't focus on the beauty of it. All I could see was the sheer drop, the jagged rocks far below, and the way Roman's eyes gleamed as he looked at the precipice. "Isn't it stunning?" Roman said, spreading his arms as if to embrace the view. "This is one of my favorite spots. You can see for miles in every direction." "It's beautiful," my mother agreed, stepping closer to the edge. "I've never seen anything like it." My heart skipped a beat as she moved forward, too close to the cliff for comfort. I had to act now. "Mom, wait," I called, my voice sharper than I intended. I reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her back slightly. "Please, don't get so close." She turned to me, surprise flickering across her face. "Margot, what's wrong? You're shaking." I swallowed hard, trying to find the words to explain, but Roman's voice cut through the air before I could respond. "She's just a little nervous, that's all," Roman said smoothly, stepping closer to us. "It's understandable. Heights can be intimidating if you're not used to them." He was too close now, his hand resting lightly on my mother's shoulder as he guided her back toward the edge. The way he moved, so calm and deliberate, made my skin crawl. He was setting up the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity to push her over, to make it look like a tragic accident. I had to stop him. "No, Mom, you don't understand," I blurted out, my voice trembling. "He's not who he says he is. Roman's trying to kill us. He's after the money Dad left us." My mother froze, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "Margot, what are you talking about?" "That's..." But Roman was already reacting, his grip tightening on her shoulder as he turned to face me. His expression was cold now, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Margot, that's enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not thinking clearly." "No," I shouted, backing away as he took a step toward me. "I know what I heard, Roman. I know you're planning to kill us and make it look like an accident." My mother looked between us, her face pale with confusion. "Roman, what is she talking about?" Roman's eyes flickered with anger, but he kept his voice calm, too calm. "She's confused, darling. Grief can do that. Your father's death has been hard on her, and I think she's been struggling more than she's let on." "No, he's lying," I cried, desperation clawing at me. "Mom, please, you have to believe me." But my mother was torn, caught between her love for me and the trust she had placed in Roman. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear that maybe, just maybe, I was telling the truth. Roman stepped forward, his voice soothing, as if he were calming a frightened child. "Margot, we should go back down the trail. We can talk about this when you're feeling better." But I knew that if we went back down, I might not get another chance to escape. I was out of time, and Roman was losing patience. His mask of calm was slipping, and I could see the cold calculation in his eyes. "No," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "We're not going anywhere with you, Roman. Not ever again." Roman's expression hardened, and for a moment I thought he might lunge at me, might try to force me closer to the edge. But before he could act, a sound from behind us made him pause. Everything all right up here? We'd all turned to see two men stepping out of the trees, rifles slung over their shoulders. They were dressed in camouflage gear, clearly hunters who had been out in the woods. Their faces were friendly, but their eyes were sharp, taking in the tense scene in front of them. "Who are you?" Roman demanded, his voice tight with barely concealed frustration. The taller of the two men nodded politely, though there was a hint of wariness in his gaze. "Just passing through. Saw the three of you up here and thought we'd say hello. You folks doing some hiking?" I felt a surge of relief so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. These men, these strangers, might be the only chance we had to get away from Roman. "Yes," I said quickly, stepping toward them. We were just about to head back down. Roman shot me a warning look, but I ignored him, my focus entirely on the hunters. "Could you walk with us?" I'm not feeling well, and I feel safer with more people around." The taller hunter glanced at his companion, then nodded. "Of course, we're heading down too. Be happy to keep you company." Roman's jaw tightened, and I could see the fury boiling beneath the surface. But he couldn't argue without revealing his true intentions, not with witnesses so close. "All right," he said finally, his voice strained. "Let's go." The walk back down the trail was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Roman stayed close to my mother, his hand on her arm as if to remind her of his control. But I stayed close to the hunters, my heart racing as I prayed that we would make it back to the car before Roman tried something desperate. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the parking lot. The hunters tipped their hats to us as they walked toward their truck, and I felt a wave of gratitude toward them. They had no idea what they had just saved us from. Roman was silent as we got into the car, his jaw clenched in barely suppressed rage. My mother sat beside him, her face pale and drawn, the weight of my accusations hanging heavily between them. I knew that she was struggling to process what I had said, to reconcile the man she loved with the monster I had described. As Roman started the car and pulled onto the road, I knew that this wasn't over. Roman was too dangerous to let go, and I had no idea what he might do next. But for now, we were alive, and I had bought us some time. I just had to figure out how to stop him for good, before it was too late. The tension in the car was suffocating as we drove down the winding mountain roads. Roman's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with barely controlled rage. My mother sat silently in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed out the window, lost in thought. I could feel the fury radiating from Roman like a dark cloud, and I knew that whatever he was planning next, it would be good. We had to get away from him, and fast. The car was quiet except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional rustling of leaves outside. I was in the back seat, my mind racing with plans and counterplans, trying to figure out how we could escape. I knew that Roman wouldn't let us go easily. He had already shown how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. But the presence of the hunters had delayed his plan, and I had to use that window of time to find a way out. I leaned forward slightly, trying to catch my mother's eye. "Mom," I whispered urgently, "we need to get away from him. We can't go back home." She turned her head slightly, her face pale and strained. "Margot, what are you saying? We can't just run away." "Yes, we can," I insisted, lowering my voice so Roman wouldn't hear. "Mom, he's dangerous. You saw the way he was acting up there. He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." "But where would we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We can't just leave everything behind." "We'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We just need to get away from him. We can go to the police, tell them what happened." Roman's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and I could see the cold calculation in his gaze. "Is everything all right back there?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. My mother glanced at me, clearly unsure of what to say. I had to act fast before Roman could regain control of the situation. "Actually," I said quickly, forcing a casual tone, "I need to use the bathroom. Can we stop somewhere?" Roman's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "There's a gas station coming up in a few miles. We can stop there." I could feel my heart racing as I leaned back in my seat. This was my chance. If we could just get out of the car, we might be able to escape. I just had to keep Roman from getting suspicious. The minutes ticked by slowly as we drove, the road twisting and turning through the dense forest. Finally, the gas station came into view, a small, isolated building surrounded by thick trees. Roman pulled into the parking lot and stopped the car, his eyes watching me closely as I unbuckled my seatbelt. "Thanks," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be right back." I glanced at my mother, silently urging her to follow me, but she hesitated, still too shaken to make a move. I had to get her away from him, but I couldn't push too hard, not with Roman so close. As I stepped out of the car, the cool mountain air hit me, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. I had to find a way to get us both out of here, before Roman realized what I was trying to do. I walked quickly toward the gas station, my mind racing as I tried to come up with a plan. Inside, the gas station was dimly lit and mostly empty, except for an older man behind the counter who looked up as I entered. I made my way to the restroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to find a way to signal for help without alerting Roman. As I washed my hands, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with fear. I couldn't let Roman see how scared I was. I had to stay calm, stay focused. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going back to the car. I couldn't risk Roman taking us somewhere even more isolated. I had to get to the phone at the counter and call the police. I opened the bathroom door cautiously, peeking out to see if Roman was watching. He wasn't in sight, but I knew he was probably waiting near the car, keeping an eye on my mother. I had to be quick. I walked briskly to the counter, my heart pounding. The man behind the counter looked up, his expression curious. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Could I use your phone? It's an emergency." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the urgency in my tone. "Sure thing, miss," he said, handing me the phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The phone rang once, twice, and then a calm voice answered on the other end. 911, what's your emergency?" I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting Roman to come bursting through the door at any moment. "I need help," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "My stepfather is trying to kill us. We're at a gas station on Route 12, near the mountains. Please, you have to send someone quickly." "Stay on the line, ma'am," the operator said, her voice calm and professional. "Help is on the way. Are you in immediate danger?" I hesitated, glancing toward the door. "I'm inside the gas station, but my mom is still in the car with him. Please hurry." "We're sending officers to your location now," the operator assured me. "Stay where you are and don't confront him. Help is coming." I hung up the phone just as the door to the gas station swung open. My heart leaped into my throat as Roman walked in, his expression dark and unreadable. "What's taking so long?" he asked, his voice tight with barely concealed frustration. "I'm sorry," I stammered, trying to think quickly. I got a little dizzy. I just needed a minute." Roman's eyes narrowed, and I could see the suspicion in his gaze. He stepped closer, his presence looming over me, and I had to resist the urge to back away. "We need to get back on the road," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Your mother's waiting." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right, let's go." As I turned to follow him out of the gas station, I caught the eye of the man behind the counter. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, and I felt a flicker of hope. He knew something was wrong, and he would back me up if things went south. We walked back to the car, the tension between us palpable. My mother was still sitting in the passenger seat, looking more anxious than ever. I could see the worry in her eyes as Roman and I approached, and I knew she was starting to sense that something was terribly wrong. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Just fine," Roman said, his tone clipped. "Let's get moving." I hesitated for a split second, my hand hovering over the car door handle. I couldn't go back in that car. I couldn't let him take us somewhere else, somewhere where we might not have a chance to escape. Just as Roman was about to open the driver's side door, The sound of sirens pierced the air, growing louder and closer by the second. Roman's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock and fury as two police cars screeched to a halt in the gas station parking lot. "No," he hissed under his breath, his face twisting in rage. He turned to me, his eyes blazing with fury. "What did you do?" I took a step back, my heart racing as the police officers got out of their cars, their hands on their weapons. "It's over, Roman," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "You're not going to hurt us anymore." Roman's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was nowhere for him to go. The police officers were already moving in, surrounding him. "Put your hands where we can see them," one of the officers commanded, his voice firm and authoritative. For a moment, it looked like Roman might resist, might try to make a run for it, but then he saw the determination in the officer's eyes, the guns pointed directly at him, and he knew he was out of options. Slowly, reluctantly, he raised his hands, his face a mask of cold fury. The officers moved in quickly, cuffing him and leading him away from the car. My mother watched in stunned silence, her hand covering her mouth as the reality of the situation finally sank in. As Roman was escorted to the police car, he turned his head and shot me one last, venomous look. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You'll regret this, Margot." I shivered, but I refused to look away. "No, Roman, you're the one who'll regret it." The police officers led him away, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. We were safe. One of the officers approached us, his expression kind but serious. "Are you both all right?" I nodded, though I still felt like I was in a daze. "Yes, we're okay, thank you." My mother finally seemed to snap out of her shock, tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at me. "Margot, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, Ma," I said softly, pulling her into a hug. "We're safe now. That's all that matters." The officer smiled reassuringly. "We'll take it from here. You two just focus on taking care of each other." As the officers took our statements and made sure we were all right, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the first time in what felt like forever. Roman was in custody, and my mother and I were free from his grasp. We had a long road ahead of us, but at least we were on that road together, and we were finally safe. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs, the tension thick in the air as we awaited the verdict. My mother sat beside me, her hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. I could feel the anxiety radiating from her, but I also saw a quiet resolve in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She had been through so much, and today would mark the beginning of a new chapter for both of us, one where Roman could no longer haunt our lives. Roman sat across the courtroom, his expression unreadable as he stared straight ahead. His once immaculate appearance was now disheveled, his eyes sunken from weeks of confinement. His lawyer whispered something to him, but Roman didn't respond, his focus remaining on the judge's bench. He knew as well as we did that this was the end of the line for him. I couldn't help but think back to that day in the mountains, the fear and desperation that had consumed me as I realized what Roman had been planning. It was a miracle that we had escaped, and now justice was finally within reach. The hunters who had intervened that day had testified, recounting how they had stumbled upon us just in time. Their presence had been our salvation, and I couldn't thank them enough for what they had done. The prosecutor stood, his voice confident and clear as he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence you've seen and the testimonies you've heard paint a clear picture of the defendant's intentions. Roman Vance manipulated and terrorized his family in an attempt to gain control of their wealth. He plotted to murder his stepdaughter and coerce his wife into a state of despair so he could inherit everything. But his plans were thwarted by the courage of Margot and the intervention of those who came to their aid. We ask that you find the defendant guilty on all charges, ensuring that justice is served and that no one else falls victim to his twisted schemes." As the prosecutor spoke, I felt a surge of pride. Despite everything we had been through, we had stood up to Roman, and now the truth was out in the open for everyone to see. The defense attorney rose next, his tone measured but lacking the conviction that had once driven his arguments. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client maintains his innocence. While the circumstances surrounding this case are tragic, We must remember that there is no definitive proof that Roman Vance intended to harm anyone. The events in question are based on assumptions and interpretations, not concrete evidence. I urge you to consider this as you deliberate. His words rang hollow, and I could see the doubt in the jurors' eyes. They had seen the evidence, heard the recording I had made during that fateful car ride where Roman had all but confessed to his plans. There was no way they could dismiss the truth. The judge's gavel echoed through the room as he called for a brief recess before the jury was to deliberate. My mother and I exchanged a glance, both of us too nervous to speak. This moment, the culmination of all our fear and determination, was almost here. After what felt like an eternity, the jury returned, their faces solemn as they took their seats. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked, his voice steady and authoritative. The foreperson nodded, holding the verdict slip in her hand. "We have, Your Honor." My heart pounded in my chest as the judge instructed the foreperson to read the verdict. My mother squeezed my hand, her grip trembling. "In the case of the state versus Roman Vance," the foreperson began, her voice clear, "we, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all charges." The words hung in the air for a moment, a wave of relief crashing over me as I realized what this meant. Roman had been found guilty. He wouldn't be able to hurt us or anyone else ever again. The judge nodded solemnly. "Roman Vance, you have been found guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and coercion. You will be sentenced accordingly. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell, signaling the end of the trial. Roman's lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, but Roman shrugged him off, his face contorting with anger as the reality of his situation sank in. Two bailiffs moved in to handcuff him, but before they could take him away, he turned to face me and my mother. "This isn't over," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You'll regret this, Margot. Both of you will." But his threats no longer had power over me. I met his gaze steadily, unflinching. "No, Roman, you're done. You'll never hurt us again." The bailiffs led him away, his protests and curses fading as the courtroom doors closed behind him. I let out a shaky breath, feeling the weight of the past months lifting off my shoulders. My mother turned to me, tears glistening in her eyes. "Margot, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." I hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her embrace. "We made it through, Ma. That's what matters. We're safe now." She pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. I should have protected you better." "You did protect me," I said softly. "We protected each other." As we left the courtroom, the weight of everything we had been through began to lift. The sun was shining outside, the world seeming brighter and more hopeful than it had in months. My mother and I walked side by side, feeling a newfound strength in each other's presence. As we reached the steps of the courthouse, a man approached us. He was tall, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Mrs. Vance, Miss Margot, I'm Detective Harris. I just wanted to say how brave you both were through all of this. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." "Thank you, Detective," my mother said, her voice steady. "We appreciate everything you and your team have done." Detective Harris nodded, then looked at me. "You got a lot of courage, Margot. Not everyone could have done what you did." I smiled slightly, feeling a mix of pride and humility. I just did what I had to do. As the detective walked away, my mother and I stood in the sunlight, the future stretching out before us. It was a future where we were free from fear, free to rebuild our lives. "Mom," I said after a moment, "about that new boyfriend of yours." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Don't worry, Margot. I'm not rushing into anything. I've learned my lesson." I smiled, relieved. "Good. Let's just take it one step at a time." She nodded, linking her arm with mine, one step at a time. And as we walked away from the courthouse, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger than ever before.